Unfazed by the disruption, Cage, now speaking more vehemently, garnered attention of passers-by, but their concerns for him were quickly extinguished by the frosty chill, causing them to shield their faces like arc welders from a blazing light. Their large winter coats quickly swallowed up their faces as they pulled on the strings and battened down the clasps and snaps that functioned to hold them closed. Everyone in the immediate vicinity took a more conservative posture, lowering themselves closer to the ground in the event of a fall, their arms folded and/or grabbed onto nearby objects to gain stability, and attempted to outweight its rapid, forceful introduction. A large black dog abruptly jumped from the driver's side of the car parked next to Cage, startling him further and adding to Cage's stress. The dog's snarling bark was relentless and aggressive, making it more difficult for Cage to hear his wife on the phone. Cage plugged one ear, pressed the phone to his ear while rapidly rotating his head away from the dog. The dog continued to bark furiously, flinging globs of slobber from its teeth onto the car's window. Cage loved dogs and had 2 German Shepherds at home, but in this desperate moment would have wished all dogs were non-existent. Cage was a healthy, well-built man in his 30s, or could have passed for his late 20s. Cage understood technology, but still attempted to get a better cellular connection, or perhaps troubleshoot the call with his frantic movements. The man was known to his immediate family as Dad, and to Cage by others. Cage was unmistakably the son of the elderly man now iced over at home in a peaceful catatonic state, pushed into his deep slumber by an unseen force. Almost as if possessed by something supernatural, unworldly, a witch's spell, or perhaps something worse or better, Dad's eyes were clear Arctic blue, and no less piercing than his father's. His eyes sat into his face, revealing the same colours found in the epic magazine pictures containing glaciers. They had concentrated marbleized stripes radiating from their centre, like creeping lightning frozen in eternity. His skin was beautifully pale, white, perfect, snowy, if you will. His eyes bounced side to side, dancing into a ghostly stare as he thought of his injured wife. Below his eyes were brushes of dark shadows that sunk deep into his perfectly symmetrical cheeks, cutting his jaw in a perfect square, unexplainably purposeful in its form. Evolved. His lips were also perfect in their thin shape and colour to cover his perfect porcelain white teeth, that too seemed to have purpose. His hair had a large wave to it and was light brown, containing groomed rows of well-defined streaks of white. White, not grey. Cage was used to people staring at his unusual appearance. Though he wasn't an albino, he often wished he was. But any prolonged stare from his small community was quickly squelched by a wolf-like stare, and devilish smile, and presence that could be felt through a cold, unforgiving chill. If willed, everyone in town knew Cage, so most of these confrontations were usually from tourists hopping into town to camp or to take a tour of the Native American village that thrived on the visitors. Cage tapped his cell phone against his truck, and as he did, a creeping frost made its way from where his hand touched the truck, outward and upward, stretching and crawling quickly like a beautiful frosty vine. Across the windows in his truck, then across the dash, cracking his windshield as it passed, and snapping his windshield wipers free from their position on the windshield. "Laurie!" he shouted. Laurie was now doubled over on the floor, trying to speak into the phone. "Hospital! Hospital!" She shrieked out repeatedly into the phone with the hopes that one of her broadcasts would be heard through the labyrinth of unreliability, also known as the phone cell company. "I'm going to hospital! I'm going to hospital! 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 I'm driving! Hospital! Hospital!" She winced again in pain as she bore down. "Grandpa's asleep. Summer, come home. He's awake. Come home. Summer, I'm okay." She started to crawl her way, creating a trail down the frost-filled hallway to finally arrive at the keys hanging on the wall next to the giant steel front door. She waited for the contraction to cease before she attempted to stand and grab the keys. She coached herself. "Ready? 1, 2, 3, and with brisk effort and a powerful heave, she lifted herself to her feet. Laurie exhaled and blew out, her lips pursed together tightly, maximizing her efforts to control her breathing as she practiced. Now, with her mind temporarily freed from the servitude of the receding pain, she acted quickly, knowing that it would soon return, more frequently and without a doubt more fiercely. Like an ocean's tide, the pain was merely retreating to rebuild itself into something larger and more formidable. "The switches," she whispered to herself. The purpose and priority of the house was to manage its systems, maintain a stable, cool environment, especially in the months they were to be utilized, the more critical months, the months when Grandpa and Dad would fall into their seasonal hibernation. She expeditiously removed the car keys from the wall and tossed them into a small pocket on the chest of her jacket. She quickly shuffled stiff-legged over to the master panel to avoid slipping or the induction of pain. She arrived with quick effort to the master switches located in a small room adjacent to the kitchen. The hum of the abundance of electronic systems became louder as she walked into the room. The power that was contained within the large grey panels could almost be felt in the form of a static discharge to all those that entered. The room was warmed up while the house systems worked along to maintain homeostasis to a summer-like 34 degrees. Switches could be heard throwing themselves, automatically popping and clicking loudly and abruptly. Electronic beeps rhythmically chirped from all sides of the tiny closet-like room. "Maintain the box." She released a little smile. She said busily, "The box," or the icebox, is what Grandpa affectionately called the giant home. He frequently joked about how he would sleep and eventually die in the same place the family stored ice cream. Instantly she erased Grandpa's sarcasm for her soothing tone from her mind. She looked across all of the control panel's displays. 2 of the displays flashed consistently. Their digital readouts were in green letters that read, "Auto." The other 2 displayed were flashing in red and displaying the word "Manual." She pulled off one of the thick insulated gloves from her hand, and while almost simultaneously throwing up the 2 other large hinged breaker-type control switches, locking both of them into place. Next, she robotically typed in her password when prompted on the center LCD display. The other 2 readouts now changed to display a 60-second countdown. A soft and pleasant female voice counted along with the displayed countdown. "Oh, shit," she said, disappointed with herself. She turned her head to the left to focus on the protective ice mask and glasses that were hanging next to the front door, and with the timelessness of a fine-tuned watch, the contractions returned, forcing her to the ground again. "You're too early," she shouted at her unborn, clutching at her belly with a look that begged for relief. She knew she had to get to her feet. She had to get out of the house before the cooling system engaged. Down the hallway she could hear the computer announcing the closing of doors that would normally provide her with a habitat that is suitable for life, her life, that is. "Door 2, master bedroom closed. Door 3, den closed. Door 5, sliding hallway closing. Stand back. Door 5, sliding hallway door closed. Door 5, sliding hallway door closed. Warning. 15 seconds until thermal regulation initiated. Warning. 14, 13, 12. The computer droned on emotionlessly, unconcerned about the death it was prepared to unleash. Laurie, already in extraordinary pain, made her way across the floor. Laurie screamed and cried in agony as she slowly progressed, with her belly contracting forcibly and uncontrollably. Her thick, insulated pants became saturated with bright red blood rapidly accumulating in her groin. Her right hand remained ungloved, sticking to the surface of the frosty door, tearing bits of her flesh from her hand. She struggled to pull it away as the blood adhered, making the situation even worse. With the determination only found in the instinct of mothers, she worked to move herself from the icy trap. The blood flowing from her hand froze instantly as it dripped on the floor. She lifted herself to her elbows, allowing her body to twist to protect her baby from making contact with the chilly surface. Inch by inch she progressed, creating a sandpaper-like sound. to the front door, to her sanctuary in the safety of the outdoors. Generators began to turn on from outside the house, shaking and rattling awake. The windows began to vibrate as several large, powerful fans began to circulate a deadly chill throughout the sealed chambers. The house creaked and wailed as the cold crept and crawled throughout, sounding like an old wooden ship in a deep, unforgiving sea. Laurie's contraction temporarily subsided, affording Laurie the ability to stagger to her feet drunkenly. She looked back across the room, following on the floor the bloody trail she created in her struggle. The blood trail had lightened, bit by the rapidly accumulating frost. In a pool of blood not far from where she stood lay a cluster of shiny yet familiar objects. Laurie closed her blurry, frost-burned eyes in what looked to be a strategic and rapid-placed prayer. Exhausted, she thumped across her chest with her frozen hands and hoped to detect the keys she most definitely knew would not be there. She lackadaisically threw the mask over her chapped face, rapidly accumulating frost, and barely managed to cover her eyes with the snow goggles. She walked over to the center of the floor like a zombie and ripped the keys from the frozen blood puddle. She straightened her back like an elderly woman and then proceeded to walk over to the door. Battered, but standing. Pausing briefly in the doorway, her teeth chattered uncontrollably. I've felt worse, she fumbled to speak. Laurie made it down the small ramp leading from the front door to the driveway. She pulled the other glove from her left hand with her teeth, and with an extreme lack of dexterity, barely managed to turn the SUV over with her quivering, weak hand. She slammed the car into reverse and floored the accelerator, cutting across the snow-covered field adjacent to the long and windy driveway. She was weak, and not from the cold. She had definitely felt worse, and for longer periods. Laurie was weak and pale from the blood loss. She glanced down as she felt another contraction coming on, screaming as she sped down the roadway, just within control. The hospital was now just a few minutes away as she felt a pop and even more warmth between her legs. Cage, having only heard nothing more than a few fragments of digitized static radiating from his phone, was panicked, but was still able to make out the word hospital. So he knew it was time. Cage was relieved that he happened to be in town, right next to the hospital. He was literally parked next to it, parked in a small parking lot just outside a cabinet shop on the west side of the town. Cage, saturated with panic, attempted to maintain his composure, all the while knowing somehow that this was really it. No, this time it wasn't a case of Braxton Hicks, cramps, or even one of Laurie's bouts of clumsiness. This was it. Cage felt a sudden surge of dizziness, followed by a surge of something radiating throughout his body. Something sinister. He knew the feeling all too well, and even more so that he'd better control it soon, before someone or something gets hurt. "Oh no, not now," he mumbled to himself in a deep whisper, hunched over, gritting his teeth. "Not now." His voice changed mid-sentence into something low and coarse, an evil growling tone that resonated from deep within him, from some place else, from something else, something not human. The deep, guttural sounds continued groaning like a waking volcano. Their deep resonance was no doubt hostile in their nature, ascending from within his chest, forcing the old truck to shed its rusty skin as it shuddered and vibrated. The old rust danced across the truck's weathered body like sawdust on a workbench, causing some to fall free and accumulating into narrow piles around the truck, forming an outline of the vehicle as if it was a detective's homicide investigation. Cage squinted and looked to be in a bit of pain as he turned to face the south. Along the horizon, something mysterious emitted a discoloration. The radiating glow revealed itself, constricting, as his etiolated eyes remained firm and situated, unremitting in their feeble attempts to analyze the glow that remained there so obstinately. Cage again attempted to gauge and measure the light's intensity, but in doing so he became more tired and fatigued. Cage was mesmerized by its seductive, destructive, smouldering gleam. Cage became even more tired as he staggered, sidestepping, uncontrollably resembling a heavyweight fighter in the 15th round of his title fight. The kind of tired you feel at the edge of your deepest sleep, or when waking from an operative sedation. It was indeed difficult. The sky's continued hue was a brilliant yellow, and contained dashes of gold flashing and pulsating intensity. Most likely this supernatural event would be miraculous to mere humans, but to Cage it was less pleasurable and draining to every ounce of his body, a rainbow at its edge that only Cage's kind could see. It was him. He was awake. Behind Cage was the sound of a car chirping as it trampled over several cement parking bumpers, before coming to a stop at the front of the ER. It was Laurie. The hill that he had to climb by a stream along the hospital's edge might as well have been Mount Everest in Dad's condition. Cage's attention was brought to the hospital directly behind him.